Joined now by NHL insider Frank Seravalli of the Frankly Speaking podcast and Daily Faceoff, usually on Fridays, but we're switching it up this week with both our Franks, actually. Corrado on Friday, Seravalli on Wednesday. How you doing, Frank?
Good. Let's be frank about it.
In today's cap world, you have to trade like for like, right? You can't
money in, money out.
Well, there's a bit of a, I think that would be offensive for Frank Corrado. I mean, former professional athlete. No one's ever looked at him and said he's done anything athletic. I mean, kind of a big deal.
Yeah. Now, you might have had a different experience than us with Frozen Frenzy on your side of the border, Frank. And I know everybody in Philly was watching the NLCS game last night, but early returns, early observations from 32 teams, 16 games, staggered start, and all of the jumping around that happened on the national networks last night.
So I think they did a really good job with it. I thought the idea of the logistics involved to get 32 teams, it's hard to find that much building availability, and to do it in a spot where you're able to stagger the start times. Now there's a few things that I don't like about it. One is the fact that it was on a Tuesday in October. I don't think does really anyone any favors, especially going head to head with an NLCS Game 7, at least in this market. I think, too, the idea that it wasn't available in Canada is a big miss. And I don't know what kind of hoops would be involved to have a partner do something similar and surf around. I think there's one other instance later this year where all 32 teams are in action again. So maybe they could right that wrong somehow. The other part of it is I don't really get the staggered start times. And you heard Derek Lalonde, coach of the Detroit Red Wings, complain about it, saying, look, our fans are some of the best in the league, most loyal. 8:23 start time, local time, doesn't really make a lot of sense for us. And then you've got, other teams starting at 6 Eastern. So if you're an Eastern time zone, which I say all the time is the worst damn time zone to watch sports, you had 6 o'clock, and then the Vegas Golden Knights Flyers game, an East-based team, they dropped the puck at 11:08 local time. Like, we're closing in on 2 a.m. I only made it through the second period of that game. That's all I could keep my eyes open for. So that's kind of how it works. The staggered start times, like, did you need it? Does anyone really complain about the bulk of NFL games starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time? They don't complain about it being staggered then, not being staggered.
And to Derek Lalonde's point, nobody wants to be in downtown Detroit at 11 p.m. after
it has changed a lot.
That's changed.
I know it has. And did the Super Bowl there, Super Bowl 40, and have been back since.
But I still wouldn't volunteer it.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And look, the NLCS, I guess they scheduled it up against the NLCS, not knowing when the NLCS would be, but they also scheduled it up against the first night of the NBA. I think it's got
still Tuesday night in October. Like,
that's
it's October. It doesn't really. Hockey doesn't register south of the border until after the Super Bowl has been awarded.
Right. And I do think
maybe that's an attempt to wrestle it,
well,
issue, but
concept here, I think, needs some massaging, but we'll see what they got planned. We'll see what they got.
That they leaned into it. Like, so you had George Parros from the Department of Player Safety. He's in his war room doing it. Obviously the Situation Room's doing their thing. Gary Bettman did a live hit after 11 p.m. Eastern in his own house. I mean,
oh, wow.
The commissioner's up late watching hockey. That to me was like a unique little insight into the NHL's world. I thought they really pushed it hard.
What do you make of the?
I don't know. How did his house look? Any fireplace?
He had multiple screens in the background. You could tell that he's got it all.
He's got a war room
right in front of him.
Okay.
We had one criticism from our listeners saying there's not enough good officials to all work the same night all at once. And we know they've got a big quiver of officials, but there were some bad calls last night. The thrown stick in particular that wasn't called. Is that an issue, do you think, to having all the officials working? Does it sap the well dry?
Well, I think on a good night, they're pretty short-staffed in terms of not even what you or I would call good, but how about just experience?
Right.
The turnover in the last 5 to 7 years in the NHL officiating community is immense. Like, you're dealing with lots of long-term vets, guys that they'd show up in your building and you'd know their name. That doesn't really happen anymore. There's a small core handful of guys that you can kind of rely on and trust. I think that's one. And also, whenever you have 32 teams in action on one night, you're also kind of bracing for impact as a league. Like other stuff, Jacob Lauko takes a skate right above the eye. John Ludwig in Pittsburgh makes his NHL debut. He gets knocked out cold on his way down to the ice after making a hit at center ice. Like just weird and wacky stuff that is bound to happen on anytime there's that much action.
Why is it just happenstance? Did a bunch of officials age out at the same time, Frank?
So, yeah.
Was it pandemic related?
Part of it.
Why?
I think part of it was also injury based. Look, there's a lot of miles that these guys put on the ice and off, traveling alone. So there was some retirements, there was some injuries. There was also there's a few guys, and I don't know their names off the top of my head. I have to look at it, but a few guys that they were like, hey, this guy's not up to snuff. He's not cutting the mustard here. We're going to move on and go in a different direction.
Vancouver fans know of one of those guys.
Yeah.
What I do like is that they've taken a lot of guys, which you can see were recent retirees in the minor leagues, and have fast tracked them like they were ECHL or AHL players that 2 years after retiring had gone through their entire system and had made it to the NHL.
Wow.
Corey Severette is a guy that's one of those guys. There's a whole handful of them that are recent players that have no officiating experience, that basically just jumped right into AHL and NHL preseason games and made it to the NHL quickly.
Heritage Classic this weekend. And this is the 20th anniversary, with apologies to Michigan State, the OG outdoor game for hockey. Frank, what do you make of what the league has done with the outdoor and stadium series games? And, will this one be any more special because it's an anniversary of the Flames and Oilers getting together at Commonwealth back in 2003?
So actually it was Oilers Habs in 20
Jose
years
Theodore.
ago.
Jose Theodore, yes.
So this it's not a remake, but what I do like is that it is Battle of Alberta. We know that was rekindled over the last few years with those two teams meeting in the playoffs and having some crazy regular season games. So I thought that was a nice touch, was to make it a rivalry game. It's smart. Will it be any more special or different? Probably not. It's actually also supposed to be pretty cold. I think the high temperature in Edmonton on Sunday is -2. That's the high. So it's already stowing a bit in Edmonton. I'm going there tomorrow. Not really looking forward to that part of it. For it being late October, it's like 22 degrees today here in Philly. I like the outdoor games. I at times I felt like they've been overdone, but I get where their heads at with this one. Have it be two provincial rivals, Connor McDavid, who may not play now. I mean, I like the idea of it. Let's see the execution.
Yeah. Do you think they're going to back off of the outdoor games? Not the Winter Classic, that's a hallmark, but are we going to see a backing off here in the next few years to the minimum a little bit, just to try to rekindle some, the fact that they're special maybe?
Probably not. I mean, I think part of it is the cat is out of the bag, and the other part is the TV partners love it, and because the ratings are higher than normal games, and then they love the business component of it. It's still going to be a massive draw in Edmonton. And I can tell you that ticket prices were really high. Like, it's not on track, at least at the moment, to be a sellout, because this is a pretty significant ask of fans, especially regular season ticket holders, that, you buck up $400 or $500 a ticket. Like, that becomes a pretty expensive outing for your family. So I understand why fans, they like the idea of it, but then they check their statement at the end of the month and they're like, holy smokes.
What do you think of Kraken Golden Knights on January 1st at T-Mobile?
I think the setting will be great. I love the idea of putting it in that ballpark. It's always looked really good on TV, and the Kraken are obviously going to get rewarded for their entrance to the league, that price tag that they paid, and also the fact that you're putting two of these expansion franchises together kind of makes sense. It
And
Should have
I
been Vancouver, though.
I was just going to say, Frank, I hear you that you're putting but as Blake and I were talking about earlier in the week, does Vegas have enough of a fan base that some are going to travel? Because if you make that a Canucks game, gosh,
Yeah.
floods of Canucks fans cross the border and you have an incredible scene and maybe even a 50-50 crowd.
It's like a Jays game there, right? Like,
right.
So I'm thinking, so this is me like aimlessly doing something the other day. I had the TV on, and I think one of the broadcasters from ESPN, not a hockey person, was promoting that game, and they said the long-standing rivalry between the Kraken and Golden Knights. I go, like how long could it possibly be? Like, what are we even talking about here?
Oh my goodness.
Speaking of ticket prices and unsold tickets, Mark Shipman, the governor of the Winnipeg Jets, does an interview with TSN's Darren Dreger, basically just trying to cool the temperature from everybody wondering about these small crowds in Winnipeg and whether the Jets are going to be in danger of being relocated. Again, you think there's a greater game afoot here? Huh?
I do, because I think essentially what the Jets, in answering the question, first off, they provide a definitive statement saying, we're not going anywhere, which is important. But at the same time, the fact that it's even a topic of conversation, what's the first thing you do if you're an ardent Winnipeg Jets supporter? You go, hey, whoa, I don't even want this becoming a topic of conversation. I'm going to go buy tickets. And they were in a spot where their last, couple games, you're dealing with the smallest attendance that they've had in Jets 2.0 history. So I think league wide, the attendance story is going to be a pretty big one this year. The Washington Capitals so far, 588 game sellout streak ends this season. The Calgary Flames, Winnipeg Jets, 2 of the 7 Canadian franchises do not sell out their home opener. These are important trends to watch. The San Jose Sharks, they're going to have multiple nights moving forward where they do not draw 10,000. So in other places, you're going to see the Chicago Blackhawks bounce back in a huge arena. And you're always going to have, great crowds in Montreal, even while rebuilding, things like that are positives. But other teams, the Philadelphia Flyers, have huge swaths of sections that are not filled by fans. That's kind of unheard of in my lifetime, being a lifetime Philadelphian. Never, like, you couldn't get a ticket to the Flyers before, and now you can't give them away.
Some of it's by the team's own doing. Like San Jose has not only gone down to the studs, they're removing walls with how bad that team is. Anaheim's the same way. But when good markets aren't putting fans in the seats like Philly and Winnipeg and Calgary, that is far more concerning.
Don't even get me started on the Sharks and Kevin LeBank's thing last week.
Well, let's go to, we're burying the lead a little bit. The Canucks noise around Garland, was that just fan generated? Was there actually any momentum a week and a half ago when sort of the name was really starting to turn around, or was that agent and fan driven only? And was he really not ever that close to being traded?
I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking. I stressed to you guys last week when we talked the idea of this term being a hugely problematic factor for the Canucks. And last time I checked, that hasn't changed. So unless you find a partner that has a deal of equal term, or either that a vast difference in cap hit that would create some immediate space, it's going to be really difficult to move. You're going to have to find a team that's equally unhappy with a player that they have under contract for the next couple of years beyond this one, or else you're going to have to attach a really significant asset to it. And I think that's really the spot. Look at what the Canucks have moved out to this point to move on from some deals. It's been rather significant relative to some other teams in the league. You watch the LA Kings wiggle out of Cal Peterson and Sean Walker this summer, for instance. Like, there have been other teams that have gotten out of more problematic situations than what the Canucks have thrown at some of their contracts so far. It's just that also probably creates a wariness to then go do it again.
Lastly, Frank, if nothing else, we'll give the NHL credit for forging a competitively balanced league for the most part, and 3-point games are part and parcel of that.
Salary cap.
Yeah,
too.
well, of course. We have 4 undefeateds in regulation, 3 undefeateds, period. It's the last 2 Stanley Cup champions, the team last year, Boston, that authored a regular season unlike any other, and a Western Conference finalist last year in Dallas, who has the one overtime or shootout loss. It's stupidly early. We're not all that concerned about competitive balance, are we? Just great starts from those 4 clubs?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, look, teams always find a way to separate themselves. And if someone would have told you at this point that the Vegas Golden Knights have done something that no other team that's a defending champ has ever done, or Boston coming off of that historic season and the players that they lost, that they'd come out and have the start that they would, you probably wouldn't have believed it, because it's really rare that it happens. That said, I don't have any concerns about competitive balance at all. I mean, I think you look at, certainly look at a team like the Flyers. We were just talking about them, 3-2-1 start. They have a 2-1 lead on the Golden Knights going into the third period last night. And they've been right in the mix. So that part kind of shows you how impactful work ethic has been. And by the way, to bring it back to the Canucks, I mean, you see Rick Tocchet undress his team last week vocally. They've kind of responded in a pretty big way in that front. And guys, we've made it to, this is my last hit in October with you, and the sky is not falling.
No,
Vancouver,
it is not.
so
No, it's snowing. It's snowing on the mountains, but that's about it.
This is what we call a win.
Yeah.
This is a huge win for the Vancouver Canucks. Even if they were to get swept this weekend in the back-to-back with St. Louis and the Rangers, you have manufactured some breathing space for you where the sky wouldn't fall.
And I don't want to be someone that's sitting here taking credit, but I was in Vancouver a month ago, and I told you guys I think this team could be pretty good.
You're on the record. They're a playoff team.
And that will instantaneously mean you have to pay a visit every single fall just to ensure that this
look, next time I'll get into the cooler over your shoulder, Blake, and we'll have some fun. And look, no guarantees. I'm happy to come back on in April and eat those words if they don't make it. I like,
well, I'll tell you what, if you're in Edmonton, just hop a puddle jumper, a mountain jumper over here and come see us next week.
That's what cracks me up about Western Canada. They're like, oh yeah, it's our neighbor. Guys, it's 600 miles away. Like, I can hit 8 teams in between then and there on the East Coast.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks for this, Frank. Have a good trip to Edmonton. We'll catch up next Friday.
See you guys.
This clip brought to you by Whistler Golf Club. If you have a group of 12 or more, the group organizer plays for free. Inquire now at whistlergolf.com/groups.